What's up guys, Crazy here, back into Borderlands with a brand new update, and quite an important one because it seems that Gearbox is reverting, at least in part, some of the nerfs that they have applied to certain characters in the past. And I went ahead, did some tests, I wanted to see exactly where we stand, how significant these changes are, so I'm going to bring these tests to you guys as well. But there's a lot of stuff to talk about here. There's changes to weapons, bug fixes, so quite a bit. And yeah, let's just get started, and if you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up on it would definitely be super helpful. But I wanted to start things off with Flak because I believe that this is the more significant change over here. I believe that this is the one that was changed the most, and I want to start things off with one of the more important abilities, in this case the Leave No Trace passive ability, which is one of the first in the Hunter skills. And this was like a core centerpiece of Flak's crit build. This was the center of discussion for at least a few days now because this was quite powerful. On critical hit scores, you would have a chance to get ammo back into your magazine, and since this synergized so perfectly with Flak's crit build, it meant that you would almost always continuously shoot your weapons, even though that was not what Gearbox intended. And in the previous patch, they pretty much nerfed this to the ground. If you saw my previous video, you know already that in the previous update, having 3 out of 3 points in this one or not having it at all made almost no difference because the nerf was extremely significant. And even Gearbox came in and admitted that the change was too dramatic, so they went ahead and re-added the retrigger delay to only 0.3 seconds, which is down from the 2 seconds that it had in the previous update. So quite a significant change, at the very least on paper, because we're going to see exactly how much this translates into real world scenarios, or well, real game scenarios. I'm going to start things off with how things were before this skill was even touched in the first place. And the scenario here is pretty much the best in case. We have Graveward in his down phase, continuously shooting with a high magazine weapon into his crit point to see exactly how much ammo we got back. In the previous update, that meant that with the Dictator, with 60 bullets into the magazine, we would need more than 10 seconds to completely empty it into his crit point, which was pretty significant. It was quite absurd, and you could just shoot this weapon for so long. It was absolutely incredible. The previous nerf pretty much got that down, and it was all the way down to only 4 seconds to completely empty the magazine, which was not that far off from not having any points invested into it to begin with. So this is why Gearbox have mentioned it to being too dramatic, and this is why I also said in the previous video that somewhere in the range of 0.5 would probably be a little bit better. So I am glad that they reverted on this. But how much exactly is the change going to affect this? Well, here is one of the first tests that I ran. This is 1 out of 4, and the change over here wasn't as dramatic as I thought it would be, even though on paper it sounded so freaking awesome. So instead of like just 4.2 seconds that I needed to empty my magazine, with exactly the same setup, instead of 4.2 we now needed 5.09 to take him down. So not that big of a change, which is why I redid the tests, and the second run I had was 6.14. So the same setup again, this time around was 6.14. I ran it a bunch of times again. The next time it was again 6.14, give or take a few milliseconds. So the reason why I'm seeing these discrepancies of almost 1 second, I attribute this to the fact that this ability over here is quite a bit RNG, because the chance to actually add ammo is only 36%. So this is where I am attributing the difference from these runs, but on average you will see a difference of 5.10 to 6.15. So instead of the nerf being around 50-60%, it is now only like 30-40%, but no more than 50. So it's still quite significant, even though on paper it sounded so good. And yeah, this is going to be even more significant if you're not in best case scenarios, if you're not fighting against enemies that don't stay stationary for so long, who don't have these kind of hit points where you can continuously crit on them. And this is going to be even more brutal if you're not using a big magazine size weapon. For example, let's say you're you're using a revolver or a pistol with only like 10 to 20 bullets. In that case, your difference is going to be even smaller to non-existent. And you're probably wondering right now, should you even invest any more points into the skill anymore, considering that even after this rebuff, the skill is still nowhere near close to how it was before the skill was even touched? Well, the answer is kinda yes and no, and it kinda depends on what you're doing. In this case, since I was testing this on a boss, the difference was definitely there. It was like only like 10-20%, but it is there, it exists, and we have to acknowledge it. If you're fighting against mobs, against groups of enemies, or anything where you can't constantly pull crits, then maybe there you should decide to invest points into something else. I definitely recommended that in the previous video, and I recommend you do it now as well. For example, you can divest some of those points from Leave No Trace into Hunter's Eye, for example, if you're going with something like this, or again in the Most Dangerous Game, which is very good against badass or strong enemies. Now the next character I want to talk about is MOZE, because she also has some quite significant changes over here, and it seems that Gearbox is paying close attention to the infinite grenade spam build, which I admit is very fun, very strong, one of the most powerful in the game, and I really wish they don't gut this into the ground. But in the previous update, they of course kinda adjusted the means of destruction. This is the core, one of the core pieces of the build, and this is what made it so that you could infinitely spam your grenades. So whenever MOZE would deal splash damage, there is a chance to add ammo to her currently equipped weapons magazine, with a smaller chance to also return a grenade, and the grenade chance was here only 6%. In the previous update, they added a retrigger delay of 2 seconds, exactly how it was with FL4K, and with the new post-buff patch, they made that retrigger delay to 0.3 seconds, so again, exactly how it was with FL4K. Now what this means is that the build is just as powerful as ever, it's exactly how it was even after the previous nerf, which was even bigger. The build still continued to rock, it was still powerful, you could still infinitely spam your grenades, or at the very least almost infinitely, with barely any downtime, and because they rebuffed this ability, yeah, it's still there at the top, but this is not going to stay the same forever. As Gearbox puts it, the infinite grenade bug will be addressed in a future patch, but we wanted to enable other builds to use the means of destruction, so we dramatically reduced the retrigger delay to a reasonable number, again 2 seconds to 0.3. Now as far as other changes go, we have some changes to one of the best class mods in the game, the Blood Ladder, and this one now has a shield delay of plus 150% and a shield recharge rate of minus 50%. According to Gearbox, the Blood Ladder class mod was creating some overwhelming synergies for MOZE, so we increased the delay and decreased the recharge rate of the shield to compensate. This change should help encourage the intended use of this class mod, which is to heal shields manually, not automatically. And finally, the last change for MOZE is to close the distance active skill, and that is, it now deals the intended shock damage as well. Like normally, this is what the tooltip says as well. Bare Fist now launches its fist forward, grabs enemies at greatly increased range, dealing shock damage and pulling them back into the Iron Bear, but it didn't have the shock damage component that was bugged, so this was addressed with yesterday's update. Now outside of these, we also have a few changes to Amara as well as Zane. So Amara, they have addressed a concern that Alacrity was only rewarding players 1 point worth of bonuses even when the player invested more than 1 point. So now when you put points into Alacrity, it rewards you reload speed bonus for each rank, not just the first one. And there's also some changes to Phase Grasp to now be more accessible to all weapon types and playstyles. So now they have doubled the range to grasp an enemy, and now it can be used on targets way further away, and the cooldown is now instantly returned if you miss those targets. As far as Zane goes, Death Follows Close will correctly update several kill skills after unlocking this ability. That was a bug with the skill, so yeah, this is going to be fixed with Zane, but yeah, I don't think he's going to be that much more powerful just because of this fix. Outside of this, we have some changes coming up to weapons. The most significant one is the Lab. The projectile tick damage is now 60% of the base damage, up from just 20% how it was previously, and the projectile speed decelerates faster to increase chances of hitting the same target multiple times, and I did go ahead and test this out, and there's both positives and negatives to this change. First of all, the damage is noticeable. The lab is now in a much better place than it was before, to the point that I'm actually considering to use it. The change to the projectile speed decelerating faster when it's getting close to the enemy is also very good. You can definitely hit it more times with the same ball of energy, but this also comes with a quite big downside, and that is the fact that if you have an enemy that tends to leap back, move a lot, jump left and right, or just dodge your attacks, you're just going to find yourself in situations where your projectile actually decelerates and it completely misses the target because the target just moves out of the way, and the projectile is now so much more slower that it simply cannot get back to it, and it just ends up exploding or expiring. So that is why I said there's both positives as well as negatives to this as well. Outside of these, there's just straight up weapon buffs to other weapons in there as well. Creeping Death had its damage increased by 200%, carrier damage by 60%, gunner rank by 20%. All the sniper rifles had their scopes slightly reduced, as well as with the Jacobs, Children of the Vault, and Dell assault rifles. And finally, we also have some changes to the anointed parts. When Zane swaps positions with his digiclone, the damage gained is increased to 130%, all the way up to just 75%. Again, the same thing with Flak. When he hits the targets with Rack Attack, the target now takes 100% increased damage, all the way up from 50%. And finally, the anointed part increased damage versus badasses, no longer heals the player, but now correctly adds bonus damage to badass enemies. And this is with the weapons and a bunch of other bug fixes in there as well, such as, for example, Pain and Terror not being so stingy with quality loot. You should now see more legendaries dropping from them, though it's not 100% guaranteed. Another one is with the Dynasty Diner mission that could potentially halt mission progress for some players, addressed a reported concern that some players fell through the floor in various boss arenas. Finally, modified enemy spawn level discrepancies reported in the later parts of the campaign. It seems that in the later parts there were players who would see dramatically lower levels to other enemies compared to other nearby enemies, so that was fixed in this patch as well. Anyway, this is all there is with the update. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to comment, like and subscribe, and I'm going to see you guys in the next one.